This is ContraZoom,
where we go back and forth about film.
I'm Dakota Arsenault.
And I'm Rachel Ho.
On today's episode, we continue our yearly tradition of having an episode dedicated to Halloween. Starting way back in 2016 on episode 29, where Rachel the First and I made recommendations based on genres. Over the years, we did more genre-based picks, a remake on Dracula, and one on the unholy trinity of folk horror. We are back with another great Halloween episode, but first some housekeeping and catching up to get out of the way. It's been a weird time for ContraZoom. On the previous 10 episodes dating back to mid-August, both Rachel and I were only on 2 shows together. It feels like I don't even know you anymore. So how have you been, Rachel?
It's good. I'm glad that we resolved our feud.
Yes.
And we were able to record again together. I'm happy that we put everything to rest.
Yes, the feud of you recording and me editing.
It's just, I'm glad we were able to put all that to bed and that we can finally come back together and record an episode.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of you and Pierre shitting on me and my movie taste.
Yeah. Has it really been 10 episodes, though? That's nuts.
Yeah, going back to, I'm counting basically from after the Fantasia Festival wrap-up, because obviously before that we're doing everything together, but yeah, there's been 10 episodes after that, and only 2 of them, which was the TIFF preview and the Rover, were both on them.
And even the Rover, we recorded that one,
that was a weird one,
order. We recorded that a little bit early, so... Yeah. That doesn't even really count because I didn't even talk to you that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because we weren't talking during that time period. It was a tough time. It was a tough time for ContraZoom. It was, it was a lot of unsent messages, just leaving it unread, that kind of thing. That's the way it went.
I must say I love this feud persona we now have both on the podcast and on our social media platforms, where we're both passive aggressive towards each other.
Absolutely. This is what makes the podcast great. This is what the drama is, what brings people back. That's what
and then you got like people like Callum or Jeff who like every once in a while chime in, or Brody or Alex, stuff like that.
It's like a reality show, and then we have like a forum where people discuss
our drama.
Like things. Yeah, our drama. It's exactly what it is. But I'm good though, thank you. It's been a minute since we've recorded. How have you been, Dakota?
I've been great. Yeah, it's obviously a part of the reason why we haven't been recording together is because we did TIFF and then VIFF. And so, you're in Toronto, so you do the TIFF stuff. I'm in Vancouver, I do the VIFF stuff. And so there's a natural separation there between us just for doing that. So it's sort of interesting where like, it's just like I'm on a time delay with what you're seeing out there.
It's actually very true. You are on a time delay. And then also I just don't like Tusk, and I did not feel like doing an episode about it, but I also wasn't feeling very well. But yeah, generally speaking, just didn't want to. Not that I didn't. If I was healthy, I would have done it. Maybe.
Well, that's a terrific segue, because my next thing was you missed last week's A24 retrospective, and I am dying to hear your thoughts on the discussion and your own personal thoughts on Tusk.
I will say, I think you had the benefit of however many years have passed since Tusk came out, of hearing how much people hated it. And I won't say I hate it. I just don't get the point of the movie. Like, I watch it and I just think that was a waste of time. Like, that's just it. It was a waste of time. But I feel like because you've had, when did it come out? How many years
2014.
Is it now?
So almost a decade.
Oh,
so 9
not
years.
not as long as I thought it was, though, actually. I thought it was a bit longer. But you've effectively have had 10 years of hearing about how much people don't like the movie. Because generally speaking, I think people don't like it.
Yes.
And so when you go to watch it, your feeling is, this is going to be the worst thing I've ever seen. But then you watch it and you go, actually, it's not as bad as people say it is. Which is what always happens when you hear too much about a movie, whether it's overhyped or really underhyped. Although I don't think Tusk is underhyped. I think it's a silly, stupid movie. That is... It does nothing. Like, I just don't, whatever. I don't get it. And, but I'm glad you guys had, seemed to have a good time discussing it. Yeah. So good. I do not have a double bill pairing. For
No,
that
nothing
movie,
prepared
by the
for
way.
that. No,
I could say it could just any other movie. Like just watch something else as a palate
to
cleanser.
just cleanse your palate.
I just don't, and I don't like Tusk. Like I am one of those people who staunchly, actively dislikes it because, yeah, I just think it's a waste of time. It's a waste of film, and it might not have been filmed on film, but it's a waste of film.
It's so funny where you were started sending me messages saying that you were listening to it, and I totally expect you to start calling me out for my once again super bougie double bill pairing pick, and I got nothing. So like, where is it? Where's the passive aggressive? I chose a 1930s horror movie, and you got nothing for me
because I literally have never heard of it. And then also though, not only had I never heard of it, but when I read was it the synopsis or maybe it's the poster of the movie? I won't lie, it just kind of made me laugh a little bit. So the poster, it's just on the very top says, "Can a full-grown woman truly love a midget?" I'm like, what kind of a movie is this? That's literally on the poster. I was like, what is this movie that Dakota just picked? And so it didn't feel bougie because it's a weird tagline on a film poster.
I'll say
a tagline
this.
that definitely is of its time. Like you could not put that on a poster today.
I'll say this, it's a movie from the 1930s, but considering the subject matter, I feel like it's handled pretty tactfully, and in fact it goes to show that basically the moral of the movie is the people without any physical disabilities are the real monsters in the world, sort of thing.
So it's kind of, I guess, like the the discussion that people have today about like ableism and things like that.
Yeah, so and considering it was like 1932, it's done really well, and it is a genuinely unnerving movie too.
I'll have to watch it. Like I think that's why I remember hearing it, thought I do not know what this movie is, and then I looked it up, and then I think the wiki page, the poster is the image for the wiki page. I just read it. I was like, why is Dakota picking a movie that's talking about a full-grown woman? Can she truly love a midget? I'm like, that's weird. Yeah. But the way, you make it sound better.
Awesome.
I'll check it out one day. It sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Especially for the time period. You're right. Like that's really interesting.
And it's the director is Todd Browning, who did the original Dracula as well.
Yeah, which, hey now. What a tie-in to our current episode.
But before, a little bit more housekeeping. You also have some very exciting news. You, alongside friend of the show, Alicia Mughal, and hopefully future friend of the show, Rose Ho, just launched a new site. So tell us all about it.
Yeah, the three of us came together and we have a new site called The Asian Cut, CUT. And it's just a website that is going to focus exclusively on Asian-led and Asian-produced, Asian-written, directed, so on and so forth, films and TV shows as well, and potentially even plays. Like we actually got some interest for plays, which maybe I'm going to be a theater critic. Like that's something.
Oh, now who's bougie?
I know, it'd be super bougie to do that. But yeah, so we just were interested in wanting. How can I put this? We wanted to make a website that celebrated Asian film from Asia, but also Asian artists in the diaspora. So basically, like the three of us, like we grew up in the West, and that kind of creates a bit of a different discussion, different mindset than what I call the real Asian people who live in actual Asia. So yeah, we wanted to do a site that was about Asian films by Asian people who have an interest in Asian films and promoting Asian artists. And we also wanted it to be a place that we could have new and established Asian writers, film critics, film journalists who want to talk about some movies that maybe other outlets don't really want to give them the time to do because it's a smaller movie or maybe it's a very old movie or whatever. And yeah, so we just wanted to kind of build a bit of a community, and it's very new. We're still working to get content onto the website, but Alicia's got a great review of a Persian film called, I want to say, The Night. I've got an interview with Andrew Chung on there, who directed a movie called White Elephant, and it's going to be that's on CBC Gem now in Canada. So it's a work in progress, but we're all very excited about it. So yeah, thank you for giving me that little shout out. Also, I want to point out, Rose and I have the same last name, but we are not related.
I'm not going to be racist and assume that.
You wondered that, didn't you?
No. Don't throw me under this metaphorical racist bus.
You wondered that, didn't you? I knew you did.
So does this mean that you will not allow me to write an essay on Seven Samurai or Akira Kurosawa? Because I am not Asian?
So the tricky thing is thing.
What's the tricky
about
thing
just how much do we want to discriminate is basically what we were talking about. But I hope people do understand, like, we are looking specifically for Asian writers. And I do get that this is a form of discrimination, and all that kind of stuff. But it's a bit complicated. It's a bit tricky to talk in those parameters about, because I do understand that it's potentially not fair. But at the same time, we had a bit of a mandate for the site that it was going to be for Asian writers who might not do it full time, who might who are just starting out, or not even wanting to do it as a career. They just want to write something, and it's just a space for them. So that's
totally
why.
Fair.
So you, as a white man, can find a different website to write for. If you want to talk about Seven Samurai, go for it.
Okay.
You could be one of countless other white men who have been writing essays about Seven Samurai.
You also wrote an article about Flower Drum. I forget what the...
Oh, yeah. Flower Drum Song.
Yeah, that's it. Which throws back to the very first time you were on ContraZoom, when we were talking about basically Asian American movies, and that was one that you were referencing then.
Yeah, and that essay actually came about because of that episode that we did. I had done all this research about the movie, and it was a movie that up until that point I had no idea about. And it's funny, when I put it up, like, Rose and Alicia both hadn't heard of it either. So it's one of those kind of quieter Asian films, and that's the kind of thing that we're hoping to do, is to, like, get more eyes on some of the history with Asian American films, or, like, not specifically American, but you know what I mean, like Asian diasporic. I don't think that's a word. But yeah, and we're also looking to cover, like, Asia proper, so not just East Asia, but we want to look at, like, Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands and Central Asia, which has a really interesting film community. And like I said, Alicia did a review on a Persian movie, and of course South Asian as well, like the big Bollywood films that, I mean, we're never going to be able to write about every single Bollywood movie out there, but yeah, we want to try to make it as wide in scope for Asian film as possible.
No, that's really cool. I'm very excited to see what the three of you are able to do, because I feel like this is a terrific idea, and I already have visions of, like, what you're going to be able to pull together and the type of people that are going to want to contribute to this site. I think it's going to be a pretty spectacular thing that you're building.
Thank you. Even though you can't even write on it, I appreciate that.
I can read it and enjoy it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm looking forward. Like, I'm excited. It's something that we've been talking about for a few months, and then in the last month, really, that we really ramped it up and got everything together. So yeah, so work in progress, but we're getting there, and we're going to keep trucking on.
Nice. And of course, you will be able to find that in the show notes, as always. And then the last thing, you also have a new job title at Exclaim Magazine. I want to congratulate you on becoming the film editor. That's huge news.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the thing I was very low key about sharing. About just kind of, so it's cool. I'm now in charge of the film section of Exclaim, and I've been writing for them for, I think, about a year now, maybe a bit over a year, like a year and a half at this point. It's a great group. Like, I mean, they started off as a music magazine, and they still do obviously a lot of music. But yeah, it's been fun to build out the film section, and hopefully get some like interesting, cool, especially like Canadian movies. That's what I'm more looking towards. But yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely a new role for me, and I'm still trying to get acclimatized with it. But it's been fun so far.
Nice. Yeah. So you go from being co-owners with Alicia on the Asian Cut and being her boss at Exclaim.
Yeah. It was kind of awkward when Alicia and I, when I first went to Alicia with that, I was not the film editor, and then after I went, oh, this kind of feels like, am I pressuring her to do this? Like, I don't want to feel like that. But yeah, I to be clear, I did talk to her about it before any of this film editor thing came about, and yeah, it's interesting, and I'm trying not to like force anyone who writes for Exclaim to write for the Asian Cut, because I think that's what they call a conflict of interest.
Hey, you're Korean. You should write for this as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like racist coercion is basically what that is. Yeah.
I'm going to have to do so much editing on this episode. Oh my gosh.
to make both of us sound okay.
Yes.
Not too overly offensive.
You know, if people listen to this podcast, it'd be canceled by now.
Well, then we can continue on our little feud and just continue to record separately. And then eventually we just dive off. Yeah. You could have contrapod and I can have zoom pod, and that's how we'll divide it up. It'll be fine.
I love it. Yeah. The zoom pod will be you, Pierre, and Simon. And Contra will be me, Matthew, and Jeff.
I still need to record something with Simon. I haven't recorded anything with him yet. And so I've spoken to him online, but I've never recorded with him. Yeah. So that's something I need to do still. Or you need to do too. We should probably, I guess, do it together.
We'll find a way to have Simon on our show, and we'll exclude Matthew.
Oh, that'd be funny. Yeah. Or I could do another Simon, or no, I guess he's never even been on contrazoompod.
Well, other than the crossover that we did for the VIF wrap up.
So then you have recorded with Simon. What are you talking about?
Oh, sorry, not Simon. Sorry, I was thinking Matthew. Sorry, no, I have not recorded at
all.
Oh,
I'm like, what are you talking about?
Oh, sorry, confusion there. No, I have not recorded at all with Simon, and I need to find a reason to.
Yeah, well, we can. This will be part of like our olive branch between the two of us. We can find something together to record with Simon and maybe Matthew.
The awesome Zoom podcast or the Contra Friday podcast. This is getting wildly out of hand right now, and we're now almost 20 minutes into the show, and we haven't even started the actual topic. So let's get to the topic at hand.
Wird mein Essen. Ich muss heute noch zu Graf Draculas Schloss.
Der Fluch wird auf den Menschen lasten. Der Fluch des Vampirs Nosferatu.
I mentioned how on a previous Halloween special, we did a remake on the Dracula movies, which was on episode 49, History of the Dracula with Stephanie. But now it is time to move on to the bootleg version of The Undead King of Transylvania. The story of Nosferatu was that the Bram Stoker estate wouldn't grant the rights to film an adaptation of Dracula to F.W. Murnau, the acclaimed German director, who's also best known for Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, a movie that won Best Picture, unique in artistic production, at the very first Oscars in 1927, a category that was discontinued the following year. Murnau was determined to make a vampire film, so he kept the same basic premise of the novel, but changed the name of the Count from Dracula to Orlok, who was played by Max Schreck, and that's about it, with the movie coming out in 1922. The Stoker estate fought the release of the film and tried to get the film destroyed, unfortunately resulting in the truncated version that still exists today, going from a supposedly 90-minute runtime to the hour and a bit one that is in circulation now. In 1979, fellow German filmmaker Werner Herzog remade the film, starring his muse Klaus Kinski in the now Dracula role, with the plot still following closer to the 22 film than the original source material. It expands on themes and characters, but it clearly owes its entire existence to the silent classic. Lastly, today we are looking at the 2000 film Shadow of the Vampire, directed by Elias Merhige, as he follows the rumor that the original Nosferatu, played by Max Schreck, was an actual vampire. Willem Dafoe plays the totally real vampire in this movie about a movie. So we have 3 unique versions of a film that will allow us to approach it in the same way that the history of the Dracula conversation went, but this won't be a traditional make-remake. Instead, Rachel and I are just going to have a free-flowing chat about these 3 films. So I guess to start it all off, Rachel, what is your history with these movies?
I'd never seen Nosferatu the Vampire, the Herzog version. I had not seen Shadow of the Vampire before. I didn't even know. I knew Herzog had done a version himself, and I knew there was a German version and an English version. So actually, which version did you end up seeing? I didn't even ask you that.
Of which? Of the original?
No, the Herzog one. Did you?
I watched the German version.
You watched the German version? That's funny.
Yeah.
I did not. I watched the English version.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I didn't realize there were 2 versions until I was looking up the movie, and he had said they had recorded everything. Like, it's not a dub. They had done it in both, one take in German, one take in English. And he said the German version, of course, is more, what's the word am I looking for? It's closer to what his intention for what he wanted the film to be, which makes sense, obviously. But yeah, and I didn't realize that. And I went, I just watched the English version. Didn't even realize there was a German. But the original Nosferatu, the 1922 version, I actually watched that on a plane, which is not the best place to watch it. However, I did have this guy behind me also watching it along with me, because it's a silent movie, so of course you can watch it. And I paused it at one point, and I went to go to the bathroom, and he stopped me, and he's like, hey, this is really good. I've never seen this one before. I was like, oh, okay. It's kind of creepy, but thank you. And yeah, so I had seen the 1922 Nosferatu, probably not in the best conditions, to be fair. It was a flight to, I think, Hong Kong or something like that. And, but the other 2, completely brand new to me. And honestly, I love all 3 of them. Like, I kind of expected maybe not to really like the Shadow of the Vampire. I thought maybe it would be a bit much. I loved it. And I know you probably have different thoughts on it. I think it's a great movie, though. So yeah, all positive, though. I love that. Like, I love when we do one of these types, like, roundup kind of episodes of a bunch of different movies. And I like all of them because it doesn't always happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like, I guess I'll start with my history too. I've seen the original Nosferatu. Probably about 10 years ago or so, I, on a whim, bought it on DVD from Amazon. And it was one of those things where I'm just like, hey, I know this is like an important movie sort of thing. And I'd read about it in different like film history books and stuff like that. So I was like, I'm kind of curious about it. So I bought it. And this is like in my, I still don't like horror movie phase where, like, I watch almost nothing scary in my life. And so this was like me, like, all right, this is me dipping in my toes and like starting from the beginning sort of thing. And I really liked it. Like, it's a fantastic film considering when it's made, the limitations of technology, all this sort of stuff, the fact that, it's a shame because the Stoker estate tried so hard to, remove from circulation this movie. The original prints do not exist anymore, so the only copies were already copies of the original negative. So it's a movie that is not in great shape. It is very grainy. There's a lot of dirt and grime on the print itself, so it's not a very especially good looking transfer. So that's a bit of a shame for film history buffs like us sort of thing. But it's still a great film.
Sorry, do you find that kind of adds to the movie a little bit? Like the fact that it is imperfect, that the print is, dirty and burnt and all this kind of stuff. Like it kind of just adds to the atmosphere and the history and the context of the film itself.
it sort of works for this film in particular. If it was a different film, I'd probably complain a bit more, being like, it's a shame that it's not a better quality to really appreciate the artistry. But it's not this, but it almost like has a bit of like a snuff film to it. Like we're watching something that we shouldn't be watching almost.
That's interesting. I never thought about that. I wouldn't have thought of Nosferatu as a snuff film. Because I feel like,
but I hadn't seen the other ones. Yeah, yes, obviously way worse than that. I had never seen the Herzog one, and I hadn't seen the latest one, the Willem Dafoe performance. But yeah, I have a fondness for the original. I really love the Herzog one because I think it did a great job of expanding on the original while still being true to it. And Shadow of the Vampire it features a really good performance by Willem Dafoe.
It's so funny. Did you not find it funny? I thought it was.
I found it hilarious, except for I don't think I'm supposed to find it hilarious.
Oh, I think you are, though. I think that's the whole point. Like, I think that it's meant to show. I think so. I think you're meant to show. I also should say that like 2 days ago, literally 2 days before watching Shadow of the Vampire, I was listening to an NPR podcast about it was one episode about method acting, and it was just talking about the history of like Stanislavski and Stella Adler and you know, all that stuff. And so I genuinely did not know that Shadow of the Vampire had anything to do with that. So I had listened to that. Like 2 days later, I watched this movie, and maybe that kind of added to me, because there was one line somebody goes, "He's just some Stanislavski lunatic," and I really cracked up laughing from that. It just made me laugh. But I think it's meant to be funny. Like, I think it's meant to be like ridiculous and absurd and funny. Like, that to me is, I don't know. Maybe I'm not supposed to be laughing, but I really do think it was meant to be funny like that.
Well, let's backtrack a little bit and start with the first one. It's a pretty bare bones movie as far as like the plot actual goes. The basic premise of Nosferatu is, obviously, if you've seen any Dracula movie, you kind of know it, especially the more faithful adaptations. But you've got Jonathan Harker, who works for a real estate company, and his boss, who we later learn is being possessed, controlled by Count Orlok is his name, not Nosferatu, Count Orlok, who sends him to the far-off land of Transylvania to sell him a estate, basically, to move to Germany. And as he comes over to Germany, he takes a boat and basically brings with him a plague that is simultaneously both the real, like a sort of a stand-in for the Black Death plague being, you know, spread by rats, but also him killing people. They're able to chalk it up to the plague because his victims obviously have bite marks like rat victims would have, sort of thing, more or less.
Rat
that would
victims.
look very different. Yeah, you know, these super villains, the rats. You know
the
what
rat
I mean.
men. They come out and they're rat men.
But that's more or less the entire plot. Is really like it's about a guy going over to Transylvania, bringing back evil with him, who then unleashes death upon Germany, and it. Basically, Jonathan Harker's wife, Mina Harker, is the only way. She's the only one that can stop him by basically sacrificing herself. In the end, is able to kill him, and that's sort of the basic bare bones plot. And I think Nosferatu really sort of just stick to it. It's the version that they have is, I think it's like 67 minutes or something like that. So there's almost no time wasted. You sort of just get right into it. It moves along beat by beat. And I think it does a really, really good job. And there's some kind of real creepy special effects that they do. Max Schreck, who plays Nosferatu, is just absolutely terrifying, just sort of like skulking in the background with like these big imposing shadows, showing his like long fingernails and like his ears and all that sort of stuff. So they do a really great job at filming him and using a lot of shadows and a lack of light to really highlight the horror. But I really love this movie.
I love the movie. I think it's kind of an interesting, it's like a bit of an interesting side discussion, I suppose, of just like loving a movie because of the history behind it and what it means and like the craft of it, because this is obviously made on a not the same budget as, like Shadow of the Vampire or Nosferatu the Vampire, and like the technology as well, obviously, is very, very different. And so what they're able to accomplish with those, what we perceive as now restrictions, but for at the time it was just reality, right? So you take all of that into consideration, and that's what makes it a great film, kind of thing. Whereas perhaps if like you just objectively looked at it in a vacuum, you'd kind of be like, oh, I still actually, I backtrack on what I just said. I think if you looked at it in a vacuum, it's still a pretty incredible piece of art. But it is different. Like, it's one of those types of movies, it would never get made today, right? Like, it just, they used what they had existing to them. And so one of the things that the movie's most well known for too is like the lighting, which I found just incredible. Like what they're able to do, showing, the different shadows and you mentioned the transfer of the copy isn't great, but like they do kind of play with the different lights and things. It's I found it a really interesting piece of artwork, almost, even though I know film is art, but like artwork in the sense of, paintings, drawings, pictures, like that kind of a thing. That for me is where this film falls into almost, versus filmmaking, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it does. And I think that's an important aspect to look at when you're watching. I think if you're like us, where you're super in the weeds with movies and movie history, where you can watch something like this and be utterly enthralled, and at the end of it be like, on like a purely entertainment level, it's fine. But what it means and the legacy it has in the time period that it comes from, that this movie is literally 100 years old. This is a 100-year-old movie.
It's incredible to think about that, isn't it? Yeah. Like, I think that's so mind-blowing to me. Like, we just watched a movie, like 100-year-old movie. I watched it on my computer. Like, that's kind of nuts to me. Like,
yeah. So I think that you're able to sort of compartmentalize what the distinction between reasons why you think this is a good movie and what works for and what doesn't work, because you're able to approach it with a lens of 100 years of movie watching experiences, of cinema going, and being like, well, as far as the way the plot advancement might have gone, or editing, or just different storytelling techniques have evolved so much in 100 years. Even comparing this movie, like obviously between this and the Herzog one, it's like completely different planets, basically. Yeah. But the 10 years of 1922 to 1932. It was a huge leap in technological advancement in the film industry. And I don't just mean like the quality of the cameras.
It's true. Yeah. And I think another aspect to it that's interesting is it is very much so made. Now, like, we can take this with a pinch of salt, and we all kind of take it for not truly understanding it, but it's made for a German audience.
Yes.
Right. And we're not German. So, and we're not Germans from the 1920s either. So it's like, it was made very specifically because in 1922, they have no concept of this movie is going to be shown in 100 years from now. And a couple kids from Canada are going to be able to watch it. Like, they don't think about it that way. Like, the movie is very directed to a very specific audience, and it's made by that audience as well. And I find that a really interesting lens to watch it through as well. Just saying, like, the sensibility, the mannerisms, what they thought was going to be appealing, what they thought was going to be scary, what they thought was going to be even controversial. That's all baked into a lot of history. And that's why I love old movies. I know some people have a bit of a difficult time sometimes watching old movies. But I always found it just really interesting from a historical point of view that, like you said, in the 10 years from 1922 to 1932, the Hollywood changes, or the movie industry around the world changes incredibly, so significantly in a way that I don't know if we've really seen that sharp of a change since then. And it's very much so intertwined with just world history and the way that societies have moved on. So yeah, I love these kinds of movies for that aspect. And I think Nosferatu, to me, the most interesting about it is that it does just remind me of, like, it's moving artwork. And I know I know technically that's what movies are. They're moving pictures, they're moving art, but it's just it's in a very different way. Like I wouldn't look at like Herzog's version. I wouldn't say that is moving artwork. Like it is a moving picture, yes, of course, but it's not moving artwork. Whereas Nosferatu, to me, it's like you could make like stop motion if you wanted to, and just like grab like pictures from it, because it's all just incredibly beautiful in a very, very haunting way.
Yeah. And I think that's where the movie really stands at its best, is especially whenever Orlok is on screen. Murnau did such a great job at sort of framing this as more or less, this is just like quite literally these are moving pictures. So let us create a picture first, because if you don't have the good picture first, none of the rest of that matters. And if you just look it up on IMDb and like you look at the first photos there, and like the first 3 are just stills of Max Schreck playing Orlok, and it's just so evocative of the feeling of the movie and everything that went behind it. And there's this real mystery, because you look at the Herzog and you're like, Klaus Kinski. Okay, if you've watched literally any Herzog movie from his German era, you've seen a Klaus Kinski performance. You know what that is. But there's this nice mystery behind who is this Max Schreck, which is, I guess, where Shadow of the Vampire sort of comes in. But all these characters who are playing, all the different actors who are playing these characters, we have no connection to any of them. So it's very much of like what you see on screen, that is it. That we literally can't compare it to anything else.
Yeah, it's incredible. And like I'm on the IMDb page right now. And yeah, the first few pictures are great, but if you go to page 2 and then you just see like the grid of all the pictures, and you've got the blue tint and the pink tint and the yellow tint, it just looks incredible. Like from an artistic perspective, it's just such an incredible movie to me. And just like a very, very like evocative is a great word for it. Evocative piece of art that we just don't make films like that anymore, for good reason, in a sense, because they had to do this. Like, this is literally all they had to work with. They didn't have sound. They didn't have special effects. They didn't, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So they did what they could with it. But it's pretty incredible where filmmaking has come from, the late 1800s to the 1920s, and then to today, like what we have. And like, we have gained a lot, obviously, but I think we've lost quite a bit as well.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those things where you can't recreate it, but you sort of wish that you sort of could. It's an interesting situation. Did the version you watched, was it a tinted one? Because the one that I own is not a tinted one.
Yeah, mine's tinted.
Okay.
Oh, yours is?
Yeah. Mine is. It's more true to the original. When they released it, it was not tinted, but all the because most of the movie takes place at night, because vampires only come out at night. Everything was shot in black and white, and to make it so that they could see it on screen, everything is very brightly lit. So they kept being like, and later that night or last night this happened. It is like these hugely brightly lit scenes, because they had to overcompensate because they were shooting at night still. So they had to re-release it later where they were tinting it. And so all the night scenes were tinted blue and all the day scenes were tinted like yellowish or like sepia-ish.
Yeah. It looks so cool though, I have to say, even if it's not the original. Like I love the color tinting on it, because I just think it adds to that, like, because they call it German impressionism.
Expressionist, yeah.
Expressionist, that's it. It just kind of adds to that idea. I don't know why. Like I don't know much about art. I'm not an arting kind of person. But yeah, like these little things that it makes me interested in art. It makes me want to like understand, art history a little bit better.
Yeah, it's really cool. And of course, if anyone has seen this and is a fan of it, you'd also like a movie like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which sort of takes that expressionist to the next level with like literally painted sets and painted shadows and stuff like that. But there's a very clear influence between Nosferatu and Dr. Caligari, especially since it's both German Impressionism, where two of the foremost directors of that era.
Which one do you prefer?
Probably Caligari, just because I think
Same.
it's a bit more plot heavy, and I also really love the visual style.
Yeah, same. I'd agree with you. Both accounts. See? Agreeing with each other. Look at us.
Oh, agreeing with each other. Now we're going to probably agree with each other a little bit more because we're going to talk about the Werner Herzog one. Would you agree that for me, it almost felt like, it's not the first time we've heard of, quote unquote, shot for shot remakes. I really feel that Nosferatu the Vampyre, the Werner Herzog version from 1979, he really does his best to almost shot for shot remake what he can to recreate the energy, and then just sort of fills out the edges a bit more. Would you sort of agree with that statement?
Yeah, and I do think he puts like a Herzog kind of, not a spin, because you're right, it's very, very faithful, but his fingerprint is definitely on this movie as well. And I always find it really impressive when you're making a remake of a film to be able to do that, like to be incredibly faithful to the original, but still somehow like in little bits, like you said, like filling out the edges in those edge fillingness stuff. Herzog, like that's where he puts his DNA into the movie, and then it just kind of permeates throughout the whole film, and it becomes undeniably, to me anyways, a Herzog film. One thing I really loved about this movie is it's kind of what we were talking about with the 1922 one, was like working within the parameters that they had. And this movie, every movie does that. But this movie, it's like 1979, so we're not into the CGI kind of stuff yet. So things are really practical. So when the one shot that I really loved was I guess it's like a cuckoo clock. Like that's their version of like a cuckoo clock, but it's really creepy with the skulls and the skeletons and that kind of a thing. I love that thing because I was watching it and then I actually rewound it and watched it again. I go, somebody had to build that. Mm-hmm. Like I love the idea that somebody actually built that and created it and made it a functional cuckoo clock. Because today they probably just do it on computer or something like that. But I really, really love that. And and you can see it too. Like you can see the workmanship in it, and you can see it. Like just the effort that somebody had to put into making something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there's a lot of like real beauty to this movie. There's the section where Nosferatu is, or I guess in this it's Count Dracula, his real name is that, coming across on the ship. And that's a key part of the original is, from the captain's log perspective of the passengers believe that there's someone in the hull of the ship. There's rats everywhere. People keep dying. We're not really sure what's going on. And so they sort of do that again. But we get a little bit more with this. Like we sort of get a bit of the perspective of the ship crew where they're not sure what's going to happen. And so one guy literally ties himself to the ship's steering wheel to make sure he can't leave because he doesn't know what's going on. And then we get this really quiet shot at the very end when it arrives into the canal, into the German city, and it's completely empty. The streets are empty. It's early in the morning, and just sort of like starts hitting the wall of the canal and like scraping up against it. And it's just this very haunting, poetic shot where the camera just sort of sits there and lets this ship come into frame, and I really like it. And then you see afterwards this dead sailor slumped over the steering wheel of the ship. So it does such a great job with sort of playing with the beauty of death.
And I loved the shots of the rats as well. I think like to what you're saying, and this is just purely an improvement on the camera, is the difference with that same sequence in the 1922 one. And this one is you get much more of like a tactile feel for things. Like you can feel the wall, you can feel, him like slumping over and all that kind of stuff. And like the little rats that are going through, like it's just, and again, that's just technology, like, cause we can see it that much clearer. But I love that. Like I loved how real everything kind of felt. And I mean, that's not an easy thing to do, even though, yes, your camera is better and we can see it, all that stuff. But it takes like a pretty good, Herzog's not a bad filmmaker. Don't know if people know that. He's all right. And it just takes someone, yeah, hot take. It's what I do. But it takes someone like a skilled filmmaker like him to really have you feel like each character, and with not like a crazy amount of dialogue either. Which I always find really impressive, because we've talked about this many times on the podcast before, of like, we both prefer that whole, show don't tell kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie really does that. Like you said, they just leave the camera and they just let it happen, and we take everything in, and there's great rewatch value in that too, because you can go back and kind of focus maybe in on something else. But like, yeah, it's really incredible the way that they can bring it all together, and in a sense, like, I don't want to say improve on the 1922 version, but it's just making it feel that much more real to us.
Yeah. I also really want to call out the performances in this version, because it's so good. Because you've got Klaus Kinski, and I've referenced him already. If you've seen other Herzog movies, whether it's like Aguilera, The Wrath of God, or Fitzcarraldo, or For a Few Dollars More, like he has been in a ton of really high profile German films and some Hollywood films as well. Playing this vampire, I think he has like a really creepy sexual energy to him, which the original one does not have. But if you look at more versions of Dracula movies, that's sort of a key component to the character, is he has this sort of sensual, sexual energy to him that is very unnerving. And we get all these shots of him where he's wearing like an all black cloak, and they're doing such a good job with the lighting where it's basically like a spotlight on his face. So he basically looks like a disembodied head, where all you sort of see is this like creepy pointy ears and his sharp fangs and his like hook nose and all this sort of stuff. And it's just very unnerving watching him, because you see him like standing up against a brick wall, but you can't see anything. All you see is his face. And it's just so unnatural to look at, because he's painted so white, and he does such a great job with this character. And then you've got Bruno Ganz, who's Jonathan Harker, who is also like a legendary actor in his own right. Most people probably know him as for playing Hitler in the movie Downfall. But he's so good, especially, I don't want to spoil the ending of this, but the movie goes basically ends where the first Nosferatu ends, but then it like goes on for an additional like 10 minutes. And it's just that little extra little bit character development that kind of brings a lot more horror to the movie, in my opinion.
We won't get into it. I love the ending of this one. Like, I absolutely love it. I love that little, and it almost seems like an obvious ending, but it's kind of not at the same time. Like, I love it. Like, it's not necessarily like, I guess it's kind of a twist, or it's like a reveal, but it really is it's very well done. Cause like the ending is probably the hardest part for a movie sometimes, like just to tie everything together. But yeah, I also want to say, like, Isabelle Adjani, she's incredible as well as Lucy. And like, it's just a very, very well done movie. And I find it funny when you talk about like the sexiness of Dracula, like, cause it's weird sexy in this movie. Like, it's kind of an unsettling sexy. And then we move to like the 90s where it's Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt in Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
but even something like Gary
sexy.
Oldman as well.
Yeah.
in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Bram Stoker's, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting the way that goes through. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that this movie, it's really, really well done from the filmmaking perspective and the performances as well. And Klaus Kinski, actually, I'm not as familiar with him as you are. Like, I recognize him. I've seen him in maybe a couple things, but I should probably go in and watch more of his stuff.
Well, he did like a dozen movies with Herzog. Like, they did everything together, even though they reportedly hated each other, because Kinski's absolutely balls to the wall insane, and the only person that rivals him for insanity is Herzog. Yeah,
maybe it's like they hated each other, but it's like besties who they're frenemies. That's what it is. They're the original frenemies.
I read that how Herzog got the performance out of Kinski that he wanted, because Kinski's very known for being like this over the top scenery chewing, where he's always wants to be yelling and sort of insane. So what he would do is, before he was they were ready to shoot their scene, he would get into a big blow up with him where they would be yelling and screaming at each other for 10, 15 minutes about how they want the scene to go. And then he'd be like, okay, now we're ready to film. And then by that point, Kinski was exhausted from arguing with him. And so he gives this very subtle, restrained, creepy performance. And that's what he wanted.
That's funny. That's really funny. Yeah, I gotta watch more of their stuff. Like I haven't seen enough of their collaborations.
Yeah, I've only seen Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and that's a really good one where he's sort of this like insane conquistador who is like willing to doom his entire crew just for a chance of glory for himself.
Interesting.
And then the last performance I want to shout out is Roland Topar, who plays the Renfield character, which is Jonathan Harker's boss at we'll call it a real estate company, who goes insane, and he has this like manic little laugh, and he gets imprisoned, and like he's like just doing this like really creepy, unnatural like hee 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 sort of laughter, and it's just like, what is wrong with this guy? But it works. It's very creepy and unnerving.
Der Meister ist hier.
I think that's so Herzog in my, because he is a very, like, Herzog as a man to me is like a very he's like a very adorable, creepy man. And so it kind of makes sense to me that like his characters are kind of cute, but they're creepy. Like, you know, the laugh is cute, but it's creepy. Like, it's a very unsettling. The whole thing, I mean, that's the point, right, of Nosferatu and the vampire, the Dracula story in general. It's like, it's very appealing, but in a very, very unsettling way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to the last one, and then we can kind of connect any dots we see fit, and that's Shadow of the Vampire. So as I said at the beginning, it is basically a movie about a movie. So there was a rumor that Max Schreck, who plays Count Orlok, was actually a vampire. His performance was that good, people were convinced he was a literal vampire, and so they decided to make a movie. Well, what if that was true? What would that look like? And obviously, if you, with the benefit of the internet now, you can see that Max Schreck was a very decorated theater performer. He acted in movies both before and after Nosferatu. Like, he was just a well-respected veteran of the German industry. And so we know that's fake. So you sort of go into this movie being like, all right, we're going on a whim and a bit of a supposition here of how this all sort of works out. But it's basically the Willem Dafoe show of chewing the scenery. And apparently because of this is why he got cast as Green Goblin in the Spider-Man movies. So take that as you will.
I didn't know that. That makes sense, I guess. Yeah. I think he's in, there's nobody else that could have been Green Goblin. Like, anyways, we're not talking about Green Goblin. But it's funny you say that he's the one chewing the scenery. To me, it's John Malkovich, who's just, I mean, that's John Malkovich, generally speaking. This is the way he is. Like, he's nuts. He's crazy. But I really love this movie. I just thought it was so fun. And you said to me, like, you were like, it's a very 90s movie, and I would agree with that. Maybe that's why I like it so much, because I do enjoy the 90s style of film. But there's just something, there's such a, like, a, you know, I had mentioned it before. I had spoken, or I had been listening to that podcast about method acting, and it's like such a bonkers kind of concept, and it does take acting to be maybe a bit self-important and, you know, whatever, and all that kind of, like, all the stereotypes that people want to throw at actors and things like that. And I just love how this movie takes all of that into, like, it's basically a satire of method acting and filmmaking in general, but then you wrap it up and be like, oh no, he's actually, in this case, he's actually a vampire. Like, it is real. Like, he is genuinely a vampire. But at the beginning, so again, I didn't know anything about it. So at the beginning, I genuinely thought he was just like a method actor. And I was like, he's so funny, because like he was just like reading the thing, and I'm like, this guy, he's like so deep into it. And then all of a sudden he gets thrown like, okay, read this thing. And then he's like, wait, hold on. Like, what am I reading here? And it just made me laugh. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really funny. Maybe it's our sense of humors are differing here.
Yeah, I think for me, the issue is the technique of the filmmaking. So I found that this was not dense enough of a plot movie where you basically, you jump right in. They're already filming this movie, and it's literally just takes place over a few weeks or however long the shooting was of the original Nosferatu, and that's it. We don't really get any sort of backstory. We see nothing outside of what's going on the set, and that inherently isn't wrong. The issue is I don't think that there's enough there to really drive the plot, so it just sort of left me wanting a bit more. And then there is, I wish there was a little bit more ambiguity about whether or not Dafoe was actually a vampire, because I think they do a good enough job a lot of the time of creating doubt. You know, there's stuff about like the actress who is playing Greta Schroeder, who's played by Catherine McCormick, who is a opioid addict, where she's clearly taking some sort of heroin or morphine. I can't remember exactly. Laudanum, I think, is what they were calling it. And I think they do a really good job of sort of playing up the, you know, this idea of she's going through withdrawal, she's an addict, so you can't really trust her perspective of what she's seeing. And I thought that they were going to sort of play that up a little bit more. And then the idea of the method acting, I really like that idea, and I think they could have played that up a bit more to make it seem more realistic. Like, I really wished that it wasn't revealed that he was a vampire until the final attack on Greta, basically, where it's sort of, it almost could have been an interesting allegory. I know this is about 20 years prior to the Me Too movement, but he keeps talking about how the only payment that he wants is that he wants Greta. And that he was going to have her. And I thought that they were making an interesting allusion to the way female actors are treated by the film community, where they are just a commodity. And I thought that was sort of an interesting idea that they were exploring, but it turns out that they weren't really exploring that at all. So I don't know. I liked it. I thought the performances Malkovich was very good. I thought Willem Dafoe was a little too much at some points, but still I thought overall was very good. I thought Eddie Izzard was wildly miscast in this movie. But yeah, like it's a fine enough movie for me. But do you think that what I'm saying there, does that, like, did you feel any of that, or am I sort of off base?
So, okay, I think I agree. Like, I think that if you want to make it a more like sophisticated movie, in a sense, like a more polished film, I think you do exactly what you just said. Like, you dig a bit deeper into the themes of, you know, the point about Greta and the way that she's used by, as currency, right? Like as a commodity, like you said. I think that's really interesting, and that, like, yeah, you can dig into that. You know, suspending the idea that, or suspending the reveal that he is an actual vampire until the end, like that makes for a really interesting plot twist, almost like a nice kind of cool reveal for the very, very end of the film. But I think that that's valid. Like, I think that it's valid to want better from a movie, because it would make it a more cohesive kind of film. But I also, just as we took into the time period of 1922 and 1979, it's like movies even 20 years ago weren't made with such, like, they weren't meant to be like deep thought exercises all the time. Some were, sure, some were, but a lot of movies were just made to be kind of like, they're just kind of made to be fun, in a sense, and not, you know, nothing like, people have talked about that, like, how come today horror movies aren't just horror movies? Horror movies today always need to have some sort of really deep clawing meaning behind it, that we talk about society and race and, you know, socioeconomic imbalances, gender imbalances, all that kind of stuff. And people say that with comedy as well. Like, comedy now has to be really clever and satirical and those things. But there was a time when, I think this pre 9/11, when we were making movies, when movies were being made, and you could just kind of be a bit ridiculous, and you could just be a bit broad, and it didn't need to be polished. It didn't need to be, you know, think tanks. Like, they could just be entertaining films to watch. And that's what I really took from this one, which is just, it's a funny movie and it's kind of dumb. And yes, there's a lot that if you wanted to make it a quote unquote like critically good movie, an objective good movie, you would change a lot about it, especially with the filmmaking techniques and the storytelling techniques that we have today. But I think for the time period, like it's 2000, so we can kind of safely call it a 90s movie still.
Yeah.
You know, the type of movie that was being made then was just for sheer enjoyment. And it does point like at the absurdity of filmmaking and that industry. And it does, you know, point to the way that I one of the bits that you said, you know, why not leave the reveal that he's an actual vampire to the end? I think it lends a really strong comedic value that John Malkovich is and we know he is aware that the guy's actually real and that they are about to sacrifice, you know, the only female that's on set for him. And like, there is an absurdity to it that Malkovich plays really, really well as the director, because he's so calm and everything. Well, not all the time. Sometimes he's a bit shouty because he's John Malkovich and he's shouty. But there's like, you know, that last bit where he's just so calm in the way that he's saying things, because he doesn't give a shit that a bunch of people died, that like he just, you know, endangered the lives of his entire crew and cast just to make a movie. And that's incredibly absurd. And yeah, so for me, it's just, if you take the time period of it, it doesn't need to be super polished. It just needs to be an entertaining film. And I think it really is.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's just maybe the expectation I was wanting to get out of the movie versus what it actually was. And maybe that's just me sort of coming out of back-to-back really interesting movies and just sort of being let down a little bit, even if there is some really good stuff happening in it.
The tone of this one is completely different to the other two, isn't it? Like, but I think so. For the record, Dakota picked these three movies for us to watch. So there's a lot of like Dracula movies or Nosferatu kind of type movies that we could have done, but like, you know, I thought this was an excellent triple pairing, if you will, because it does show the exact same story, but from different angles, different time periods. But you're right. Like, if you don't know, I assume like you kind of like me, you just went into it a bit blind. Like we just watched the movie without. Yeah. So if you come after thinking, oh, it's going to be like a 2000s version of Nosferatu, then yeah, this is not that movie. It's a very, very different movie. But as I said, I think it's very much so in keeping with the time period, the filmmaking time period, and exemplifies it perfectly, just as the 1922 version did, just as the 1979 version did.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair. And like John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe do give some pretty great performances in this. They are very over the top. You can't have a movie that features Malkovich and Dafoe where they're not trying to one up each other, because that's basically impossible with the type of actors that they are.
And they're weird. Like they're weird people, the two of them. Like I've seen enough interviews between the two of them. Like they're weird. And it's funny because we were talking about like the Herzog version and saying like it's very unsettling creepiness to them, but it's kind of like a haunting, cute, just weird. But this is weird in a very different way. Like this, like these guys are weird in I suppose a more modern way. Like they're kind of odd. It's not necessarily unsettling. They're just weird. And I love that. I will say the accents, like, because they were all trying to do German.
Oh my god,
those were terrible. I will say it was really, really bad.
It was really bad. Willem Dafoe's I thought was fine.
Carrie Elves. How did you say his last name actually? Elves. Elwes.
Yeah, Carrie Elwes, I think it is.
Elwes? Yeah, I never knew how to say that. His accent is atrocious. I love him dearly. Like, he's been a part of some really, really great movies that I adore, but his German accent was absolutely atrocious, to the point that I thought that he was still supposed to be British, because he is actually British in real life. But I thought he was kind of British, but like a little off British. I shouldn't say off British, like just maybe a bit of a regional, like a regional dialect. And then I was like, oh no, I think he's trying to do like a German accent.
His character's name was Fritz Wagner. I don't think you can get a more German name than that.
like just like from Birmingham or something like that. Like,
And Eddie Izzard basically didn't try doing an accent
No,
at all.
he
Just sort of
didn't.
kept his British accent and just made it a bit softer, which all that is sort of like combined, where you have Udo Kier, who's a legendary German actor, have a pretty big part in this movie and be like the only real German. And I'm sure he was probably just like biting his tongue the entire movie of like, oh my God, these people all sound ridiculous.
but also, like, again, I think it just adds to this idea of like, it's a ridiculous movie. Like, it's an absurd movie, but I think that's the point. Like, I really do think that's the point, and that it's not meant to be taken that seriously. Like, you know, I mean, we've seen, what was that movie with Tom Cruise? Valkyrie? I think it's just called Valkyrie, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he plays a German, and at the beginning, the movie starts off with like someone's reading a letter in German, and then all of a sudden Tom Cruise's American accent just comes through. And that is supposed to be a serious movie. Like, that is genuinely supposed to be a very serious, very, like, you know, dramatic film. And in those instances, I'm always like, what the hell is this? So weird. But in this type of movie where it is just weird and it is just out there, I don't mind it. Like, I'm not that pulled away by the fact that they have silly accents. Like, we could probably do better German accents. Not that I'm saying we should try, but I'm just saying.
Yes, we need Matthew here to do that.
Yeah.
When you were watching it, I swore that the guy playing the cameraman was Alan Rickman, and was trying to figure out, I'm like, is that Alan Rickman? I didn't see his name in the opening credits. And Stephanie was like, I think it kind of looks like him. I was like, no, that has to be Alan Rickman. And so I'm like pulling up IMDb and I'm scrolling through and being like, is he uncredited? What's going on here? And then like, I couldn't figure it out. And finally I was like, okay, I need to go basically person by person to figure out who this person is. And it's an actor named Ronan Vibert. And you look at him and he looks identical to Alan Rickman. Identical. Look him up. I swear. Ronan Vibert.
I know. I had literally the exact same thought process as you. When he first came on, I went, I didn't know Alan Rickman was in this movie. I said, that's interesting. Then he spoke and I kind of went, is that Alan Rickman though? Because it doesn't, because Alan Rickman had like an incredibly distinct voice. And I was like,
yes.
Is it? But then also kind of what we were talking about, really bad German accent. So I go, is Alan Rickman just doing like a shitty German accent? Maybe that's what he's doing.
Is he doing his Hans Gruber accent again?
Oh God! Oh right, I forgot he did that.
He has done his German, yeah,
you're right. But it was just like,
and it was much better than anything in this movie.
It's very, very true, and it still wasn't a good accent.
No,
but I literally went through the exact same, and I pulled up the wiki because I'm a wiki girl. I'm not too much of an IMDb girl, and I went through each person, and I was like, okay, and I even actors who I knew who they were, I still double checked it because I'm like, who is this? Because I'm like,
is this John Malkovich?
Because I was like, there is something weird going on here. I'm like, that has to be Alan Rickman, but who is this man? And then I came across and I looked him up too, and I go, wow, he really does look like Alan Rickman, but not. And
he's British too.
Yeah, it's so strange. It's very, very strange. But I said this to you on when I was messaging you about it, but the movie poster on Wiki, speaking of thinking somebody was in the movie and they weren't, I genuinely thought John Travolta was in this movie. Because when I looked up the movies, I just wanted to make sure that I was pulling the right films. And so I looked up the Wiki on it, and I see the movie poster on Wiki. And there's two men. There's one big face and then Nosferatu. And the big face, I really thought that was John Travolta. And so in my head, I went, oh, John Travolta did a vampire movie. That's interesting. And so when I was watching the movie, and it's going through, and I go, I'm 30 minutes into this. And I was like, where's John Travolta at? I was like,
Johnny T.
I was not even in this movie. And then even still, I'm looking at the movie poster now. I can accept that that's meant to be John Malkovich. It does not look like John Malkovich.
It doesn't.
It really reminds me of a movie poster that John Travolta did have where they made his eyes super, super blue. And I don't know what movie that is, but it looks like John Travolta. And so it was one of those things watching this movie of, one, I thought John Travolta was coming in, and then two, I thought Alan Rickman was in it. And I go, wow, this is a crazy movie. The 90s were a wild time, weren't they? Just John Travolta and you got all these people in it. And then, John Travolta never shows up. for anybody wondering, he is not in this movie. There's no John Travolta. Doesn't it look like him though? Like,
it sort of does, like a sort of a slimmer face, because John Travolta has a very round head.
He does, yeah.
Like the way it's cropped, you can imagine it.
I thought it was John Travolta. I was kind of disappointed. I was like, oh, there's no John Travolta in this.
The last thing I sort of want to talk about for this movie is the director, Elias Merhige, or however you say his name. This guy basically just disappeared off the face of the earth. He's directed 3 movies, sort of like not quite a student film, but an experimental film in 1989 called Begotten, Shadow of the Vampire in 2000, and then Suspect Zero in 2004, and hasn't done anything since. So I have no idea what this guy did. Like, I know Suspect Zero, I remember when it came out, I remember seeing the poster and the movie up in Blockbuster and all that sort of stuff. So I imagine it was, did well enough business wise, but I know it wasn't well received. But Shadow of the Vampire got 2 Oscar nominations, including one for Willem Dafoe and the other one for best makeup and hairstyling. It like confuses me when like you look up someone and be like, oh, what else did this person do? Oh, nothing else.
Well, I mean, looking at Suspect Zero, so I've never seen it. The movie poster does look very, very familiar, but I don't think I've ever watched it. But just looking at it now, it says it bombed at the box office, only made 11 million, and it was like a Tom Cruise production, randomly.
Like it starred Aaron Eckhart and Ben Kingsley and Carrie-Anne Moss.
Aaron Moss, big name. Well, yeah. Aaron Eckhart was a big name back then too, but it's just maybe Tom Cruise blacklisted him. Maybe Tom Cruise wasn't having anything of it. You know, I don't know. Maybe it's one of those things where he's like a sensitive man to his art, and so he had one thing fail and couldn't quite get back on that horse.
Yeah, who knows? Interesting. Okay, let's sort of tie these 3 movies together. How did you feel watching all 3 of them in such short succession, and whether or not there was any sort of cohesive themes or feelings between it all?
I think it's like I said, I think it's a great triple billing pairing. It's not pairing. Pairing is 2. It's a triplet. It's a good triplet to watch together because, like I said, I just think it takes a very, very classic story. Like the Bram Stoker's Dracula, that was published, I think, in, I want to say 1897. That year is
something like that, yeah.
For some reason. And it's a classic story that we have seen many, many times over. Like, might not be exactly the Nosferatu story or the Dracula story, but we know Dracula as a character. We know vampires as a thing, like a type. And to me, when you put these 3 movies, it is not only just interesting to watch as looking at the same story from 3 different perspectives, but to me, it's just interesting to see as, shifting through film history. And I think it's always nice when you're able to say, like, as much as I bemoan, remakes and reboots and all that kind of stuff, because I feel like that's all we ever do anymore. When I say we, I mean the film industry. But I do like when we have certain things like Nosferatu, even like A Star is Born, something like that. Like something that keeps getting remade, but in different decades and different time periods, because it's very fascinating to see people, like, the different interpretations and the improvements in filmmaking is one thing. But to me, what's more interesting is just the way that the story gets told. Yes. And like, if they were to do another one today, it would literally be what you said, which is, the more polished version. It would be very thematic. It would have a lot of, let's talk about women and the way that they're treated. And it would probably even have, like an anti-Semitic theme as well, because that's something that we didn't talk about it, but like, that's something that people have always brought up about the Nosferatu, depiction in the German films. So I love that. Like, I love that there's a through line throughout film history for this story, that we keep getting to see different interpretations of it. And I do hope that actually somebody does another one. Or sorry, someone is doing another one.
There is, yeah. That's That's what I was going to bring up next. Is you're absolutely right. Robert Eggers has for years teased the idea that this was going to be a movie that he was going to remake, and I think his style works especially well with the idea of this, and so like you were saying, the idea of remakes inherently are not bad in and of themselves. If you have an interesting take or a fresh idea to present a story, there is nothing wrong with telling the same story. It's why you can have 100 Shakespeare adaptations, because everyone sort of brings their own flair to it. Mm-hmm. But it's when you are needlessly sort of just recreating something for the sake of it's a name brand recognition, it's going to bring in money, that's where the issues sort of go. And so I think having someone like Robert Eggers, who already has a gothic style to his films, as we've seen with The Witch and The Lighthouse, he's the perfect person to sort of do this. And frankly, I'd be disappointed if it was anyone other than Robert Eggers doing it. And we know that Bill Skarsgård is going to be playing Nosferatu, which I think is going to be excellent casting. He already has that sort of creepy energy around him with him playing Pennywise in the It films. And then we've got Lily Rose Depp, who is announced to be playing I'm going to call it Greta Schroeder, but the Lucy Harker or Mina Harker, depending on what adaptation of Dracula you're going with, the Mrs. Harker role. And then Nicholas Hoult is rumored to be in it. I'm guessing he would probably be the Jonathan Harker role.
And no Harry Styles, which... Actually, my question was going to be, or my question for you, like, do you know if that's going under Universal again? Like the Northman was, or is he's not going back to A24 though?
I don't know. I don't think that's been announced or anything like that. So yeah, I honestly don't know. I don't think he's going to go for as big of a studio. I don't know if A24 is going to distribute it or produce it. But that is definitely something that's going to be something to pay attention to, because I know he had an unpleasant time while working on the Northman due to the studio interference he got.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, though. I think that Robert Eggers is the perfect director to do something like this. And Ari Aster could have made an interesting one too, actually. But it does have that feel, like the feel of what those guys do, of you know, what we talk endlessly about on another series on the show, which is like that A24 feel. And Nosferatu definitely has that. Like it would be a perfect home for a movie like that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And I do think, you know, what you said about remakes, they're not inherently bad. It's just the purpose of people remaking stuff today is a little bit, it's just too commercialized, I suppose, now. Like, decisions are being made like that. But hopefully this one will be interesting. And I think it will be. Like, I think it'll be a really kind of dreary, gothic, artistic. It won't be like Shadow of a Vampire. I don't see Robert Eggers doing a movie like that. Or maybe like a really meta, like a downtrodden meta movie.
That would be interesting for sure.
I would watch that. Although I would miss that's the thing though. I do miss just like, you know, the general entertainment value of films. Cause now I feel like every movie needs to have a point, and it needs to have a theme. This is after me saying Tusk had no point. What was the point of that movie? So to be fair, I'm not as playful as all that, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess not. Okay. I sort of feel like that maybe wraps up our conversation on this. Do you have any last parting thoughts on our Halloween special this year?
No, it's a great choice though by you. I think that this was like Nosferatu was. We were debating between something else. I feel like. Yeah, I can't remember what it was.
I put together a few different options of ones that might be interesting. Whether it was, I think I did like Dario Argento or Giallo. The first of long running franchises, so stuff like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, all that sort of stuff, where just sort of looking at the originals and seeing how they stand up. But yeah, I really like this idea. I know it's similar to when I did the Dracula episode, which I'll link to that in the show notes in case people want to check that out. But that was very much on a remake scale of being like, let's compare how they did, you know, this character and that sort of stuff and telling the story, whereas this is a different kind of conversation.
Definitely. And like I said, I've said it, I think twice now, 3 movies that go together really, really well. So if anybody's looking for, you know, some fun October spooky month stuff to watch, that is an excellent day or an evening in, maybe not an evening, like a whole day, but to also know that Shadow of the Vampire is not that serious. So don't do what Dakota did and think it was serious.
Well, I think that wraps up our episode here today. Rachel, I know we did a whole lot of housekeeping promotion for you at the beginning, but is there anything else you want to promote, or and where can people find you and your work?
I'm going to change it up now, and I'm going to point everyone to go to the asiancut.com. Asian spelt normally, ASIAN. And yeah, go check that website out, and hopefully people find things like interesting things and different movies to watch. We're also on we're on Twitter at The Asian Cut, all one word, and then on Instagram with dots in between the Asian and cut. So you can follow us on there. Is
there other ways to spell Asian? Because you said the regular way to spell Asian. Is there a different way?
Oh yeah. Well, see, this is why you can't write for us, because you don't know what the other way to write it would be. Growing up, apparently this is a very generational thing, but AZN we used to do that a lot. No. Don't take my culture away from me, Dakota. Okay. I was trying to decide like a name for the site, and I really wanted to use AZN like somewhere in there. Because it is so tied to like the diaspora, sorry, I always say that word wrong, the diaspora side of the Asian thing. And but then I discovered that very sadly it is a very generational thing, and it never carried on to a younger generation. Like, they have no idea what we're talking about whenever we use that. But for us, like in the millennial group, it was very, very common when we were in high school to use that. So yeah, I wanted to use it, but it ended up not translating very well, generationally speaking. And also, I had told another white guy this, and he thought I was talking about like Arizona, or I think there was another thing that he thought I was talking about. But basically, it never occurred to him that it was supposed to be Asian. So I was like, all right, forget it. We're not using this.
Maybe just because I've always hated misspelling words and shortening them and using slang. Like you and I message each other a lot. I use proper grammar and punctuation for my text messages. So maybe
I do too. You and I both do that. Actually, now that I notice that, you and I both type properly. Yeah, we do. But you can just say that you don't like Asian culture,
shut up.
And that's fine. Just say that and just leave it at that. And that's another episode of ContraZoom wrapped up for the week.
So we're just going to ignore the fact that I've done several episodes celebrating Asian cinema, right? We're just going to ignore this right now?
I mean, if you think that that's enough, then that's fine. If you think that that's enough.
You know what? I think I am going to wrap this up before you get me into any real trouble here with your vicious lies.
Hey, I'm not the one who said that I hated Asian culture. So
neither did I.
That's on you. That's on you. That's on you.
You can follow this show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at contrazoompod. If you have seen any versions of the Nosferatu films, let us know your thoughts. Send an email to contrazoompod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music, and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you like listening to this show, consider tipping us on coffee. It would really mean a lot. Thanks for checking us out.